If you are considering auditioning for region on English horn, and especially if that instrument is fairly new to you, then this video is for you. First of all, I would certainly recommend that. The odds on English horn are usually much better than they are on oboe. I've even seen rooms where every English horn player made region just because of the numbers, which I have never seen on oboe. The etudes are, of course, exactly the same. The instrument is similar in a lot of ways. The fingerings are basically the same. You won't find that there are very many surprises. There are a few things to take note of. One is, of course, that you want to make sure that the English horn you have access to is actually functioning okay. Check with your private teacher, have them look it over. Sometimes if they sit unused for a while, they can be a little bit shaky with some of the sealing and some of the adjustments, and that's worth having checked out. The reeds on an English horn last a lot longer than they do on oboe, which is nice. You want to, of course, get a reputable handmade source, just like you would like to on oboe. You'll see that while they're on a staple, it's not quite the same kind of staple that's on oboe, and they have wire on them. That wire, they usually have wire on them. There are some makers who don't. That wire can adjust the opening a little bit. If you nudge the wire a little bit higher, it will increase the opening just a bit. If you nudge it down a little bit, you can make the opening a little smaller. So that can be helpful for you. You'll notice on the back of this reed, I have some silicone tubing, which helps it seal when you put it on the bocal and make sure it can't slip off or anything. Again, that's optional. Some reed makers don't use it. If you would rather add it later, there's a good chance your private teacher has some. It's also just aquarium tubing. It's not that unusual, or you can buy it. So I find that helpful. You soak your reed just like you would on oboe. You can even put the reed in an oboe reed case typically, though you might not be able to put reeds in the spaces next to it. You might have to give the cane a little more room. If it's in an oboe reed case, they do make English horn reed cases as well. When you're playing the English horn, I definitely recommend using a neck strap. If you don't have an English horn neck strap, you can actually just get away with a saxophone neck strap usually. I did for years. If you feel that the neck strap is too restrictive, it doesn't give you enough freedom with the instrument, you feel stuck, or if you've got a saxophone neck strap that doesn't fit, you can attach some rubber bands of some kind. Here I've used the little stretchy things that come on clothes. I found they're pretty durable. And you can tie that through the loop on the neck strap, or on the thumb rest, and then you attach the neck strap to that, and then you have a little more flexibility so the instrument can move up and down a bit, but you take the weight off your hand a little. And you really do want to use one. On English horn, that right hand, you can see, is much further down than it is on oboe. That's kind of a lot of extension right there, especially if you're short. If you're taller, you might get away with more, but to put that much weight on your thumb and add in all the fingering issues and that shape right there, it's not really ideal. The neck strap will get a little weight off your thumb and make that a little better. And of course, anytime you feel any pain when you're playing, you should stop and stretch and take a little break. The English horn, as you saw a second ago, uses a bocal. You can see this looks a lot like you're used to the bottom of an oboe reed looking. You might have more than one bocal in your English horn case. If you do, you want to look for writing on about this part of them. Mine doesn't, but there's a good chance that your bocal will have perhaps a number 2 on it. Usually the number 2 is the more common choice. The different numbers indicate different lengths, which will give them different pitches. Number 2 is definitely the more common. Bocals are pretty bad about losing cork. You can see I've lost some on this one. Don't let that scare you if you see a bocal without much cork on it. It's probably the one that was the most in tune, which is how it lost that cork to begin with. You put the bocal all the way in the English horn just like you would put the reed all the way in the oboe. You want to be careful to use enough cork grease so that you don't eat up too much of that cork. You want to be gentle as you put it in. And the reed will go all the way onto that. The wire on these reeds has a point on one side, and generally you want the side with the point here facing away from you because you don't want to stab yourself with that at all. The fingerings are really basically the same. You can see here they've made an effort to keep it pretty similar. There are a couple small differences. The first is the half hole. This right here is the half hole. So instead of having a hole that you cover and uncover, you have a ledge, because the hole basically is up here and the rest of the key is down here mechanically. So you sit on this ledge, and when you're on a closed half-hole note, you should probably be hitting both keys. And then you pivot off for an open half-hole note so that key can come up off the little hole in there. All the other things are mostly the same. There's no low B flat key. Some of the keys don't have holes that would on oboe, like G, then that kind of thing. They've made some shift over just a little bit to make them reachable for you, but it's pretty similar. You will notice the longer keys are more bendable on English horn. If you see that one is in a really weird position way next to your instrument, you might actually just put it back. If you're a little afraid to do that, ask your private teacher. Just the super long key here and here for that. I wouldn't mess quite so readily with any of the others. You may also find on English horn that you spend a lot more air than you would on oboe, because the opening is not as small, it's a bigger instrument. So you might find that you need to breathe in more often than you would on oboe and breathe out less often than you would. Your breathing plan may need to change because this is English horn. We should also pay attention to the amount of reed we take. The reed is a lot bigger than it is on oboe, so when you're in the right place, you're likely to feel like you're taking an uncomfortably large amount when you're coming from oboe. If I play with as little reed inside my mouth as I would have on oboe, that doesn't sound very good. The pitch is a little wonky, the tone's not well supported, it's just not quite where this reed wants me to be. If I take more than that and I get a little closer to where the heart meets the windows, that sounds a little more appropriate for this reed in this instrument, you can tell. So experiment, discuss with your private teacher, but you may end up taking more reed than you would on oboe. There are some differences with pitch and response on English horn as opposed to oboe. The most notable is the second octave key. On oboe, the second octave key notes respond very well, very clearly, and while they're not necessarily stable for pitch, the way they're unstable is very different from the way the English horn is unstable up there. English horn's more likely to be muffled up there. It's just a very different feeling up high than oboe is. Some people also have trouble with A flat, being a little bit different. How much trouble you'll have and exactly what ways will of course depend on your instrument and quite a lot on your vocal. The half-hole notes that tend to be sharp on oboe don't necessarily tend to be sharp on English horn. In fact, that D tends to run a bit flat, and so do some of the others. So you want to just keep an eye on your tuner, know that what you've learned on this instrument, it's not quite the same as oboe in all those ways. The high note fingerings, high E, high F especially, be careful that if you're using a short fingering, you really double check the tuning, because they aren't always as in tune on English horn as they are on oboe. The regular E fingering, for example, on English horn, decently in tune. Some of the short fingerings, can be way different than you might have expected them to be after oboe. So double check those high note fingerings with the tuner. Make sure that what you're using will work on your instrument. They aren't all the same as oboe. High F, same thing, and it may not go the same direction as high E. For me, it runs a little flat. But if I use the short fingering, it runs about a quarter tone flat. I have seen English horn auditions where most people used short fingerings for some high notes, and they were mostly about a quarter tone flat on them, and that definitely made a difference in the results. So check those high note fingerings for that. It's a nice instrument though. The reeds last a bit longer than they would on oboe. It's a more lower sound, a warmer sound in a lot of ways. If you do make it to All-State on this one, you're likely to get some good solos. I definitely recommend it. The first region etude is fairly similar on English horn to the way it feels on oboe. There aren't very many differences. Mostly it has the same difficult spots, the same worries. But there are a few places where the English horn will act a lot different than the oboe, and you're going to have to think pretty hard about that. Measure 3 is the first of those. The high C's on oboe tend to stick out. We have to work to pull them back. English horn's the opposite. So work to try to match the tone from the low note to the high note. Know that this instrument isn't going to make that easy, so do it slowly several times. Think about how you'll want the length to be and double check the tuning on those. In measure 16, we have the B major arpeggio. That means we have to deal with getting from low D sharp to low B. There's a couple ways to do that, and of course English horn is bigger, so they are a little more awkward on English horn, and you may choose a different one than you would have on oboe. The first uses this alternate low C key right here. You'll hit it, or you'll get close to it on the D sharp, though it won't go down because the D sharp key forces it up. You do have to still be closing that hole under the D finger. So you hit D sharp like this, and then for B, you're already on the alternate C key, so you just trade pinkies. And that finger right here is taking care of what this pinky would otherwise need to do on C. It's awkward, but it's possible. It's not super easy if your hands aren't large, but it can be done. The other options for that pattern of notes use the left pinky. You can stick the tip of your pinky key on the D sharp key, and then you can pull your wrist down to grab the B key with the knuckle. This is my favorite choice here. If you are on oboe, you could also just be in the middle and push back and forth like this. That works on English horn, but I think a little less well than it would on oboe. I find this simpler, but you can use any of those options. The second etude is where you'll likely notice the most difference between performing on English horn and performing on oboe. This etude is full of second octave key notes, and especially in the slow etude, we need to make an effort to keep them in tune and to make sure the tones match what you're trying to do musically, fit in with the notes around it. That can be a lot harder on English horn. There are a lot of high A's and high B flats here, and their pitch can be a little bit interesting depending on your instrument, your reed, and your vocal, but that's something to really keep an eye on in this piece. Also, there's plenty of high E's and F's, some of them in measure 30, for example, in places that have to be pretty carefully in tune, and those can take a little extra work. Measures 25 and 26 I found notably more difficult on English horn than oboe. Those jumps down, especially considering that the half-whole notes are actually usually a little flat on English horn, are much trickier here. You may have to actually move your embouchure a little bit more than you would on oboe to make those happen. That's going to take a little bit of careful thought. So the ending, of course, with the low C's is tricky on any instrument. The place in measure 33 where you have to start fairly loudly on some second octave key notes can be a little interesting on English horn. You might experiment with taking more reed to see if that helps that happen a little more easily, because remember, English horn doesn't love loud second octave key notes like oboe does. And since that mezzo forte in measure 33 is surrounded by pianos, we want to make sure that they really do sound notably louder than what's around them. You'll find that the third etude also feels pretty similar on English horn to the way it feels on oboe. There are a lot of arpeggios in this etude, so a lot of jumps, sometimes even up to the really high register, like in measure 7. Lots of jumping between half-wholes and second octave key notes, and the English horn is a bigger and a bit of a more clunky instrument in some ways, so that can be a little tougher here than it is on oboe sometimes. You want to be careful in places where the second octave key notes and the higher notes are very loud and very important musically, like in measure 15 with that high B flat, that the tone and the volume on those and the pitch all fit what you're trying to do. Keeping in mind English horn can be more awkward that way. In measure 18, make sure that arpeggio's in tune. Remember, the high note fingerings for that F are worth double checking with your tuner. Make sure you know what the tendencies are on some of those notes on English horn where they are not what they are on oboe. And everyone can hear the tonic arpeggio, so spend a little time on that one. In measure 19 and 20, we have D flat next to low C, which is a problem on either instrument. But English horn's a little bigger, so depending on your preference and your hand and finger size, you may choose a different way of dealing with it. There are really about two. You can hit the D flats like this, with the tip of your pinky on the D flat key, and then tilt up for C, and come back for D flat. If you have both keys down, you'll have D flat, so you don't have to get all the way up like this. You can just do that one. The other option is to use the alternate C key right here. You still have to make sure you close this hole all the way, so you slide over to that, and that covers you for C. So then it's just D flat C, D flat C. But that can be a little tougher on English horn, especially if you don't have very large fingers to cover this hole and catch this thing. If you have a private lesson teacher who's willing, you can bend this a little closer to help you out, but it's up to you which of those two options you choose. You have very much the same issue near the end of the piece in measure 33. You have D flat, C, B, C. And if you do it that way, with the wavy pinky, D flat, C, B, C, then when you come out of it, you can go to a forked F and then an A flat. If you do it the other way, notice me using this alternate C finger, D flat, C, B, C. Now, hypothetically, you could use the forked F here, but if you don't get off the alternate C key, it will make a pretty horrific sound. So you may want to use left F and then right A flat instead. So if you use the alternate C key there, D flat, C, B, C, left F, right A flat is what you would end up with. And both of those work okay. Just a matter of which you prefer. I hope you have found this video helpful. Good luck on your auditions, and good luck with the English horn. It's a lovely instrument.